I'm Jennifer Stein, and you're watching Mainline MUFON, here at Radnor Studio, Channel 21, Mainline Television's public access channel. Mainline MUFON provides free monthly educational programs at the Tredyffrin Public Library. This week, our guest was Alan Glassman. Alan has a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Southern California and has worked for numerous private architectural firms and has worked as a hospital architect for the U.S. Public Health Service. After receiving his master's degree in architecture at UC Berkeley, he worked in research and technical sales with large building product manufacturers. Alan is a member of the International Solar Energy Group, the American Society for Testing Materials, and is currently a member of the Construction Specification Institute, the Society of Architectural Historians, Tau Sigma Delta Honor Society in Architecture and Allied Arts, and is associate member of the American Institute of Architects. When Alan retired, he was able to dedicate his time to research his passions like quantum physics, metaphysical studies, and other things. These subjects include things like alternative energy, sacred geometry, archaeology, investigative mythology. Alan is a strong advocate for moving away from the fossil fuel-based economy. And Alan has been writing articles and book reviews for New Dawn magazine, which is published in Australia. You can find many of his reviews at Amazon.com. So Alan, I'm so delighted and very happy to welcome you to Mainline MUFON. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So just last night, you gave an excellent overview and presentation of the work of Joseph Farrell, a writer you've been following for a number of years. So let's start there for the viewing audience, because people who are interested in this can follow up and get more information about Joseph Farrell. So give us an overview of why you were attracted to Joseph Farrell's work.
Well, I had read some books of his. New Dawn magazine, which I've been writing for the past 10 years, coming out of Australia, asked me to do a book review of one of his books. So I did that. I submitted my book review to the editor, and the editor came back to me and said, "Would you like to write a full-length article on Joseph Farrell?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that. Very interesting guy. But I'm going to first have to read a lot of his books, because he's written over 30 books. In fact, probably 40 books if you count them all." And the editor said, "That's fine, go ahead, take your time." So I did. I read 22 of his books. Amazing, amazing author. And I submitted the article. It was rather long, 24-page typewritten article. And it has yet to be published because it's just a little bit too long, and it's rather technical, too. But I got to know Joseph Farrell. I've never met him personally. I would like to at some point in time. A fascinating man. He is somebody who seems to be able to put together various kinds of information and come up with some conclusions, some things that he thinks are happening in this world today. So,
and he has a very interesting background, too, because he didn't actually start out having an interest in things like ancient architecture, or, you know, secret black budgets or space travel, or where our military is going, or UFOs, or things like that. He really came from a very conservative background.
He really did.
Well, tell us.
He went to Oxford University, majored in theology with a specialization in patristics. Patristics comes from the word pater, father. It's a study of the fathers of the church and all the writings and things that they've done for hundreds of years.
So he really had a very fundamental background.
Sure did. He also plays as being a child, the organ, the pipe organ, as a matter of fact, which comes into play in some of the work that he did. But all of a sudden, and that was maybe 30 years ago that he was at Oxford and he was studying, up until maybe 20 years ago. 20 years ago, all of a sudden he took a dramatic shift in his thinking and in his writing and in his research, we're not exactly sure why. He doesn't say why, but
he must have stumbled on something.
He stumbled on something, and he started out early in this century, 2001, 2002, writing a trilogy of books on the pyramids at Giza in Egypt. And what he found in his research was just absolutely fascinating. He looked at the whole array of the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, and to him, they looked like something that he had seen in his native state of South Dakota, actually North and South Dakota, and that is radar arrays, and there are a number of them there to protect us in the United States from anything coming in from the north, from Canada. And he looked at those, and he looked at Giza, and he said, my God, maybe at some point in the very, very distant past, Giza was used as a radar facility of some sort.
So it's more like a military installation.
Like a military installation. So then he started looking at works by Christopher Dunn, for instance. The Giza Power Plant is one of his books. And Farrell looked at all kinds of interesting studies of the pyramids. And he finally came to the conclusion that indeed, especially in the Great Pyramid, there's something going on in there that produces energy. Now, it's not doing that now. It's doing certain things now, but it's not doing that because, of course, the casing is gone. Whatever was on top, maybe a crystal, we don't know, is gone. But he finally came to the conclusion that that whole array of pyramids was some sort of weapon of mass destruction,
right.
WMD.
Right. And that got your attention, too.
Wow.
I mean, he had also read the classics of Schwaller de Lubitsch, who was I believe he was French or German, I don't quite remember, but studied the pyramids way back in the 1900s and recognized the sacred geometry that was there, the harmonics that are there, and that a very advanced society had to have built something like that. Probably not the Egyptians. It's probably not the history that we have been led to believe.
Well, what Farrell did was look at the technology that he discovered. And because of his background in playing the pipe organ, he looked at the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid and said, wait a minute, as you go through there, as you know yourself, you have said you've been through there, and so have I, that acoustically, it's very, very interesting. Right. So he coupled that with what's in the King's Chamber, with the air shafts, and he said, I think this was an electric acoustic type of mechanism.
Which would lend itself to be to overlap into a radar array. It could have very well produced a frequency, a harmonics frequency, maybe in balance with the other pyramids, or maybe the other pyramids did different arrays because of their size and their harmonics.
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
That Grand Gallery, of course, has those corbelled, it's a corbelled arch, really, giant pieces of stone.
It's stunning. I was literally shocked when I walked up it and I looked up and I realized what I was inside of architecturally. And all you have to do is hit a note, hit a high C or something, and the sound reverberates incredibly.
Yeah. And with his background with pipe organs, he looked at those as horizontal pipes, as in a pipe organ.
Right.
And they resonate.
Right.
And he did a lot of research in the configuration inside the Great Pyramid. Even though his background is in theology, he does have a pretty good basic knowledge of physics, of mathematics, of science, of engineering. And he said, oh my gosh, what's going on here? This is producing tremendous energy. And what's it used for? What was it used for? So he started doing the research into technology, very ancient technology, and came to the conclusion with all the writings that he read, all the research that had been done prior to his looking at this, that the pyramids were built, he thinks, by some very advanced civilization long before the ancient Egyptians as we know them. He calls the actual ancient Egyptians a legacy civilization that came and took over the pyramids, occupied the pyramids at that time,
Right.
much later.
Much later.
Now, the technology is something that is post-quantum, post-quantum physics. It looks like it has to do with plasma physics, very high energy plasma physics. And one of the things that he became interested in, and I guess for some reason he contacted this, was the work that the Nazis were doing prior to World War II. And it looks like they were developing some sort of anti-gravity technology, a la Nikola Tesla, okay? So he looked at that. That became the beginning of another series of books that he wrote. And he put the two together and he said, did the Nazis find somehow, did they locate this very, what he calls paleo-ancient technology and put it together? Or were they given the paleo-ancient technology by possibly aliens? We don't know. And even, did this start long before the Nazis? So he looked back in history. He was a good historian, especially with his theology background. And he concluded that that probably happened. Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. And of course, you, having a background in architecture, you are well trained to appreciate structure, mathematics, resonance, harmonic fields. You have a real grounding in the sciences as well. And I'm sure you were able to immediately pick up on Farrell's work.
Absolutely. It fascinated me. The way he was able to put together different thoughts, different ideas, different disciplines, and come up with the conclusions that he comes up with. Now, he kept looking at the Nazis, and we're, not just Farrell, but a lot of us are fairly convinced that in the anti-gravity research that they did develop some sort of a vehicle, probably a weaponized vehicle, because of course, World War II, they wanted weapons, not just something that was flying through the air. And it probably used this kind of technology. So he then found a writer named Igor Witkowski. And Igor Witkowski did a lot of research. I believe he's Polish, did a lot of research and wrote a book on the Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapons of the Nazis, and what they developed. And one of the things that Witkowski found was something called the bell, die Glock. Okay, and we have, we don't know exactly what it looked like, but we have some artists' renditions of it. We have some descriptions of it from the Nazi literature, from the scientists at that time. That was also a very powerful weapon and could also have been used as a flying vehicle and maybe a weaponized flying vehicle. So he did a lot of research, Witkowski did. He went to the border of Germany and Poland, Silesia. He found a structure that looks like it was a test stand and could have been a test stand for the bell.
Yes, there were actually many Jews who had been imprisoned in prison camps spoke about this henge that the bell was in, that they used to see it at night, that it would rise up. There were experiments done, and the whole area was like radioactive, they believed. Many people died because of this research. And the henge is still there.
The henge is still there. We have a picture of Witkowski himself standing at the henge. So it's still a question. We don't know for sure that it was the test rig for the bell. But of course, unfortunately, with all the concentration camps, you had a steady supply of people to work on those kinds of weapons projects, even though it said that the Bell, being very, very radioactive and very powerful energy-wise, would injure and in fact kill people who were working in the vicinity of it. But of course, they had a supply of of workers to that they could replace at will, unfortunately.
Right. Yes.
Now, the Bell, when you look at it, looks like what we think the Kecksburg craft that crashed in Kecksburg in western Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh in 1965. It looks very much like that. I had a friend, he's gone now, who was the district attorney in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, who was in college at the time of the Kecksburg incident, and he and his buddies were in a fraternity, and they heard about this, and so they got into the car with their beer and everything, and they went out to try to see what this was. Well, the military wouldn't let them get close to it, but they stayed long enough in the night to see a big flatbed military truck come out with some sort of object on it that was looked like a bell. It was a bell shape or a cone shape, but quite large, maybe 15 feet tall, 9 feet wide, something like that. They didn't know for sure what it was. That, of course, got my friend very interested in UFOs. We don't know where the remains of that craft exist.
Whether it was taken to Wright-Pat or somewhere else?
We think maybe Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. We're not sure. They even think that perhaps the craft that crashed at
in
Roswell could be at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base too. We don't know. But what Farrell found out was that after the war, after World War II, when Wernher von Braun and his cadre of scientists came over to the United States, they went to Los Alamos, which is in New Mexico, not too far from Roswell, and the other half went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And they were working on very advanced technology at that time. So, putting all that together, you think, wait a minute, is this all coincidence? What's really going on?
That's right.
At the same time, after the war, you had scientists who left Germany, in fact, probably a lot of the SS themselves, maybe Hitler too, we don't know, were carted off just before the end of the war. A lot of them went to Patagonia in southern Argentina. And I personally know people who can tell you, yes, they were there, they still are there. There is a community, a German community there, and they're Nazis.
And it's cordoned off, and it's as large as like Costa Rica or something. It's a huge,
it's a big area,
geologic area.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lake there, and there was and probably still is, some sort of a facility for doing research. And the Germans were there. I believe it was Dr. Richter who was there, and ostensibly he was doing research on thermonuclear energy, but even later he admitted it was not. It was something much more advanced than that. So it was probably the technology that was operating the Bell, and Farrell thinks this is the same technology that goes way back in history, possibly to the pyramids. We don't know for sure. Now, Richter was working under the auspices of Juan Perón, who was the dictator in Argentina at that time. Perón later got rid of that those studies that he was doing, but I doubt that they ever really went away. They just went sort of underground, shall we say. So we're pretty sure that this technology is still around, that it's been developed to a great extent, and that there are weapons and that there are craft that use this technology. It's an anti-gravity technology. I'm not going to go into the terms that Farrell uses. They're very technical, but it is basically a vortex type of technology utilizing plasma, probably hydrogen plasma or some sort of plasma. It seems to work. Farrell then looked at what was happening further on here in the United States. Wernher von Braun himself, and Farrell talks about this, warned his assistant, Dr. Carol Rosin, that this technology was being developed, even though von Braun at that time was taken off of that to work on the rocket ships, which is a much more basic technology, shall we say. It's not as advanced. And von Braun told Dr. Rosin, I believe it's called, how you pronounce her name, that the military industrial complex, the weapons manufacturers especially, that business had to remain intact and had to be kept being fed with money, okay? So that then was a reason for a lot of things that have happened since World War II.
Von Braun actually predicted many events Carol Rosin.
He did. And he said,
as if it was a military plan in advance.
Well, he said, you know, in order for this to succeed, we really have to have an enemy, constantly an enemy. This is what he told Dr. Rosin. He said, first the enemy is going to be communism, which of course it was. He said, then it's going to be rogue states, you know, rogue countries. Then it's going to be terrorists. Then it's going to be asteroids, the threat of asteroids. And finally, it's going to be the threat of aliens, extraterrestrials. And he said, watch, this is going to happen. And it appears that that's the way things are moving. Farrell, of course, then wanted to know, well, how is all this financed? These secret, what we call them black projects. So he started looking at the different corporations that we have worldwide. And he looked at what happened to the Nazis after World War II. Something very, very interesting to me. He said, you know, in one of his books, he said, the Germans surrendered in World War II, but the Nazis did not surrender. Boy, that, you know, I sat up when I was reading that book and said, well, how can that be? I read a little bit further, and he said there were no members of a Nazi party who signed who signed the surrender documents. Now, there were various surrender documents because there were various fronts, but all of them were signed by military people from the German armed forces. Usually somebody from the Army, somebody from the Air Force, somebody from the Navy. And what's interesting is that Hitler, long before World War II, put out a rule that the military officers could not be members of the Nazi party. So Hitler must have thought ahead. If we lose the war, I don't want Nazism to die. Okay, Germany can lose the war and it can be rebuilt again. But I want Nazism to go on because we have a 1,000-year plan for Nazism. Nazism is what we call corporatism. So if you look at the big major corporations and the big families that originally, you know, started those corporations, and you look at what they do, they run the governments of the world. We have corporatism right now on this planet.
Well, certainly in the United States,
Certainly
a lot of people have called our
States.
democracy really a corptocracy.
Absolutely.
Of sorts.
Yeah.
Corporations have special benefits and whatnot. And on one hand, I see the benefit of that because corporations can do things that benefit the government. But on the other hand, is it something that's running away from us? Wasn't it Eisenhower who made a very famous speech when he left office, warning against this military-industrial complex?
And so did JFK. Kennedy warned against it too, and he was doing some things. I mean, he was looking at the CIA, possibly getting rid of that. He was looking at the FBI, maybe getting rid of that, challenging it at least. So he was killed, and Farrell thinks that it was the interests of this. He calls it a cabal. Other people call it a cabal. Richard Dolan calls it a cabal. That are running things.
Right.
Yeah.
Richard Dolan actually speaks about a breakaway society in a lot of his work, that's already happened, and most of the American people are not aware of it.
That's right. In fact, Farrell uses that same terminology, breakaway civilization. And he talks and he asks the question about what's going on in Antarctica right now. And we don't know, but we know a lot of famous people have gone down to Antarctica,
Right.
have come back and not said anything, starting with Admiral Byrd back in, 1948, something like that.
And recently a number of well-known people.
John Kerry and Prince, what's his name, Harry, and
yes.
President Clinton, and on and on and on, but they won't say a thing. Now, there is a good video. It's on the History Channel on Ancient Aliens that talks about Antarctica.
Right, it was episode 14, I think.
I believe it is,
yes.
and I can't remember the series, but it's just recent. It's this year. I would really I would advise everybody to look at that show, because there are some photographs in there that will just blow you away. I mean, things are happening down there. Now, maybe that is a base, and maybe it's been there for, who knows, thousands of years possibly, because remember, Antarctica wasn't always full of ice as it was. The Earth has turned, it's had various cataclysms and so on. So we don't know really what's going on
Right.
there.
Also, Linda Howe has a wonderful program online. It's earthfiles.com, and she's interviewed some ex-Marines who actually went into an underground base, and it's absolutely a fascinating video she has up online. You know. So for those who are just starting to dig into this, if they'd like to learn more about Joseph Farrell, how do you recommend they find him? And if they want to find you, what would be a good way to find you?
Well, Farrell, of course, has a daily blog every day, except holidays. He puts it out. I would recommend that people go online and
just Google him.
Google him and get that blog. It will be emailed to them every single day. It's absolutely fascinating. People write in with questions, people write in with ideas, with research that they've done, and he talks about all that and puts it together. He doesn't go out in the public very much. I suspect he may have been threatened. His life may have been threatened, because he's doing very, very advanced research. And we know he's in South Dakota somewhere, but that's about it. So they can locate him that way. They can locate him through his books. As I said, over 30 books. I had to read 22 just to do this article, and to give the talk last night. Just great stuff. As far as locating me, I do not have a website, but I have email, and probably the best place to locate me is on Amazon, Amazon.com. I have maybe 65 book reviews over the last 10 years that are on Amazon.com, that I originally wrote for the magazine New Dawn in Australia, but are now also on Amazon.
And I can also tell the listening audience that there's, and the watching audience, that MUFON TV will post your lecture that you did last night for us here at the Tredyffrin Library. So they can Google MUFON Television and subscribe to that to be able to see your program. We may also post it at mainlinemufon.com, where we often have video links to different programs we do. So it's been my great pleasure to host you, Alan. I am so grateful that you came in from the Reading area. Thank you so much for doing that. And it was really a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.